What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the continued saga of the Interstate LS. Yes, the free 5.3 liter LM7 we found on the side of I-85 just north of Newnan. Still don't know why it was there, but we're not complaining. It's turning into a more expensive motor than free though, with all the machine work and parts that are going in it. It'll probably be like $3,000 by the time it's done. That's the way it goes though. But here in the C20, we have a 4.8 liter block, which is the motor that was first in the El Camino. We're just using this old motor with no internals for mock-up. Just have a set of heads on it just so we can see how everything is gonna fit. And we're making good progress there. But today I wanna show you what I'm doing over here. So before we run this motor to the machine shop, we're gonna do a little bit of work just to clean up the cylinder walls at least. So I'm gonna grab my dingle ball hone and run it up and down these cylinders a few times just to see if the rust like this one was more substantial than it originally looks. Some of the cylinders are pretty clean, other ones were pretty rusty. This one has some decent scaling on it for sure, but we're just gonna run the dingle ball through each cylinder a little bit. I might even scrape out some of this gunk up in the top just to see what we're working with and if it is indeed buildable. I think it is. It's just gonna take a lot of cleaning, and it might need to be bored out depending on how these clean up. Anyway, we're about to find out. So this is what I generally use when I am honing an engine. This is called a flex hone. So it has the actual like dingle ball style things instead of like the 3 spring loaded plates. This one I believe is 240 grit silicon carbide. It works really good. They're made in America. I highly recommend these if you're gonna be honing your engine at home. You just hook it up to a drill. You put a little oil of some sort. I use whatever's sitting around generally. A lot of times I'll use diesel or like, you know, leftover motor oil. You just want a little bit of lubrication on the cylinder walls and it does the trick. So let me just hone this side real quick and we're gonna see how they clean up. So basically you get a little bit of oil on this as well as on the cylinder walls, and then you're gonna plunge this into the cylinder while it's spinning and drag it back and forth at an appropriate speed, like 200 or 300 RPM, and then you're moving it to where you get about a 45-degree crosshatch in the cylinder wall. So we're gonna give it a go and see how it cleans up. All right, so now I'm gonna grab a towel and wipe that out, and we're gonna see just how good it looks. So looking at it, it's definitely got a little bit of texture to the cylinder walls. I think this motor's probably gonna need bored over. You can see how it cleaned up pretty nice down there, where you can actually see some cross hatching. But here at the top, where there was clearly water sitting, I assume the piston was right here, and there was water in here, and it rusted the cylinder walls a little bit. So I think a slight overbore, some new pistons, and we can have this thing cleaned up pretty easily. Maybe we'll even get the block decked. I don't know how much we're gonna do, but I'm gonna go ahead and run the dingle ball hone down the rest of the cylinders just to see how they clean up and if there's any obvious issues that's gonna make this block junk. But I'm not gonna make you guys watch all that, so cut to the time lapse real quick. Just as I suspected, based on that first cylinder, we're definitely gonna need to bore this motor because you can see a dingle ball hone should be able to clean the cylinder wall up to where it basically looks like that rather than looking like that, because that's wiped down and clean, but that's actual pitting in the cylinder wall. It's not deep at all, so I think just boring at 30 over is gonna be plenty. You know, it's gonna need bored to clean up, you know, those scuff marks from the piston skirts as well. This bore is hands down the worst. I think it got a bunch of water in it and it's just super dirty. So you can kind of see where the water was sitting with the piston all the way down in the bore. The water was sitting at an angle in there. So it's like all the way up to the head here, but all the way down to the piston on that end. What do you know? The Interstate LS isn't exactly free. It's gonna take a few $100s in machine work, maybe almost $1,000 in machine work, bunch of parts. So by the end of it, it's gonna be kind of an expensive motor, but it'll be really cool to have found a motor on the side of the road, cleaned it up, and got it running in a truck. But yeah, not exactly what we were hoping for, but not exactly unexpected either. So we'll get this down to the machine shop, get them to clean it up, bore it out, figure out what we're gonna do for the rotating assembly. I have a couple 5.3s back there, but I guess considering I'm gonna need pistons, I can't just use a stock rotating assembly. Maybe I'll just swap pistons onto some old rods that I have. Yep, that's the way it goes sometimes. Got a little field trip going on today, taking the old 67 El Camino to the machine shop with not one, but two 5.3 liter LS motors in the bed. If you don't use your hot rod as a shop truck, you're just doing things wrong. So we got a customer's motor as well as the Interstate LS going to Dixie Performance Machine out in McDonough, Georgia. Notice how clean and nice it is compared to the gross and dirty Interstate LS. So the Interstate LS is going to the machine shop. I have a set of heads that were off of the old 5.3 that originally went in the El Camino. So I've got those heads to be reworked. The block is gonna get bored out to take care of all of this. And we're gonna get a hot tank, new cam bearings put in. She'll be good to go in the C20 service truck for power tour. And I got Moby riding shotgun, keeping me company. Yeah, buddy. We're reusing a lot of parts from old engines in the Interstate LS to get it going. So we have a set of 5.3 rods and pistons. And if you've ever wondered what the difference is between a 4.8 and a 5.3 piston, it's that flat top right there. So see that dish on a 5.3? Well, on a 4.8, that is completely flat, doesn't have that lip around the edge. But basically what I'm doing is I'm using the rods from this setup. We're putting some new pistons into that block because we're overboring it. And I need to get these press fit pins out of these rods and pistons and then clean up these rods and reuse them when we get the motor back from the machine shop. So here's what I'm doing basically. I have this piece of wood that I made where I kind of carved out a little notch and I drilled a hole for the wrist pin to go through. So you line this up right here and then you use a socket with the press and you just pop that thing right out of there and then it slides into that hole underneath and it works perfectly. So let me show you how one of them works and then I'll just do a time lapse for the rest. So here we go. So as I was saying, you bring the rod in right here and you line it up. Then you slide in a socket onto the actual pin and line it up with the press. And then you just start pressing and it'll pop right out of there. It definitely offers some resistance at first, but once it starts moving, it moves pretty easy. And there you go. You just keep pumping till it comes all the way out the bottom. It has a pretty fair amount of resistance the entire time. But I found this to be kind of the best method for doing at home. If you don't have the proper tools, you kind of just do what you can with what you got. And there you go. That's one of them out. Get that guy out of the way. And then as you can see, that wrist pin went right into that hole in this wooden block. And then you can just take your socket out and you have your rod totally unharmed, ready to go with a new piston. And there you go, just like that, my little homemade jig for pressing wrist pins out of LS pistons worked like a charm. So there's all 8 rods and pistons. They're still in order. We got 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. And now I just need to install the new pistons on the rods. And what you do when you do that is you take your new wrist pins, which I don't have here. So you take your wrist pins, you put them in the freezer, you take your connecting rods, you put them in like a toaster oven or heat them up with a torch, and then lock everything together real quick on a workbench. So I'll show you how to do that when the time comes. But for now, these are just gonna sit here while I wait for my engine to get back to the machine shop, and I'm gonna keep working on the truck. All right, my dad and I were working in the shop again tonight on the truck, and he was doing some templating with some pieces of cardboard. CAD, as we call it, cardboard assisted design, really fancy stuff. So he made a couple templates for the firewall because we're not just leaving it black like that. We're actually using this floor and tunnel shield from DEI. Yeah, should be pretty good. So we're working on that. And meanwhile over here, I got the engine back from the machine shop and I haven't shown it to you guys yet. So here's what we're dealing with. You guys might remember the Interstate LS that we found on the side of the road and how dirty and disgusting it was. Well, it is no longer dirty and disgusting. Toby over at Dixie Performance Machine did an amazing job cleaning this thing up. I mean, it doesn't even look like the same motor. Like, you can wipe your finger on it and it actually cleans your finger, I think. It's pretty amazing. So we bored it 30 over. He used torque plates and bored and honed it. We decked the block surface because it was a little pitted from sitting. And obviously, like I said, he cleaned the ever-living crap out of this thing. It's pretty incredible that it looks as good as it does. So, did new cam bearings. He polished the crank and cleaned it up as well. It looks pretty awesome. We're putting some new, just hyper-eutectic Silverlight pistons in it that are 30 over as well. So, nothing real special about them. This is not going to be a race motor, so hyper-eutectic pistons are going to work just fine. I'm working on getting those assembled with the new rods. So as janky as it is to get the rods heated up, we have a toaster oven. And I'm also gonna heat up the end of each rod with a torch before we slide the wrist pins in, because these are press fit instead of the floating pins that come in the later LS's. But that's gonna work just fine. We got new Hastings rings. I'm gonna take some time and gap those. I kind of did some rough measurements starting out, but it's getting there. Oh, and look at these. He cleaned up the main caps even, and they look freaking awesome. He like bead blasted them to where they look virtually brand new. So shout out to Toby. He does awesome work. I am thoroughly impressed. And even the heads, which are the old ones off the El Camino, forgive my sink that is kind of just used as an overflow for everything else because it doesn't have water to it yet. But these 862 heads, he cleaned to perfection, put new valve seals in them, did a valve job, and they look pretty awesome. So those are gonna be going on top of this thing. And hopefully I'll have that thing together in the next couple days so we can put it in the truck and start figuring everything else out, because without the engine in there, it's hard to do everything else. So cleaned up the transmission in the driveway, I'll get it painted, then we'll figure out our whole clutch system and just make it work. One piece at a time, right?
Yeah, and I got a frozen pizza I'm about to throw in that oven too.
With the connecting rods?
Yeah.
I'm sure that oil will be a lovely addition of flavor to your pizza.
That's right, yeah. It's like, you know, bourbon and bacon and engine oil.
So
yeah.
10W30 with your pizza.
Right.
It's a great combination. So he's gonna keep doing some CAD work, I guess, while I work on putting those pistons and rods together. Whew, that was a lot to update you guys with, but we're getting after it. We got, I don't know, 3 weeks left. Plenty of time.
Plenty of time.
So here's my setup in order to put my connecting rods onto my pistons. A lot of people wonder how to do these press fit rods and pistons at home. And really, you just need some heat. So this is just a regular style propane torch. Obviously, I have it turned way down right now. But I was using my oxyacetylene torch until, unfortunately, I ran out of oxygen in my air tank. So I have to resort to the little dinky propane torch, but I think it'll do the trick. So basically, you just heat up the end of the rod with the torch and then set everything up where you're ready, and then just slide them together, hold it in place until it cools and locks itself in, and you're good to go. So I got my connecting rods over here getting heated up to 200 degrees to make it a little easier for my propane torch. And then I'll show you slamming one of these guys together. So here we go, I'm gonna turn my torch up, grab my number 3 connecting rod out of my toaster oven, you know, real fancy like. And we're just gonna sit with this right here for a while. Here is the wrist pin that's gonna go for this one. So I'm gonna get it kinda slid into place, make sure it goes all the way through your piston. So we got a good fit there. Now I just gotta wait for the inside of this connecting rod to turn blue. So as you can see, we're heating up the end of this connecting rod using just an old propane torch that you'd use if you're camping, or if you're, you know, in a shop and you run out of oxygen on your oxyacetylene system. You can just break this little guy out, and it takes a lot longer to get it heated up, and you won't get it glowing red with this, but you'll see the inside of that rod end turn blue. That's about when you know you're ready to go. So you have your piston set up, make sure you have everything lined out the way it's supposed to go, have the wrist pin ready to go, set in there. You want all of this to be room temperature, and just want to heat up the end of this rod to the point where it slides on pretty easy. And it still takes a little bit of force to get that wrist pin to go through, but I'll show you guys when I'm about ready to slam this guy home. You guys ready? Oh yeah, that's beautiful right there. I think that'll do the trick. So there's another one done. All right, now we just get to repeat that process like a bunch more times. What, 5 more times to be exact. And there you go, just like that. All 8 pistons and connecting rods are assembled. Now I got to spend a whole bunch of time gapping these piston rings to perfection on each of these cylinders so that I can put the pistons in. But I think right now what I'm gonna do is take the crank, flip the block over, put the crank in the block, and see what it looks like, and plastic gauge it so that I can know what the clearances are gonna be. So that's the plan right now. I'm gonna work on getting this block flipped over and get that crank dropped in place with the new bearings. Yeah, buddy. I totally forgot to film this process for you guys as I put the crank in the block and made sure all the bearings had the proper clearance. But if you ever do it yourself, all you do is put the crank in with all its bearings and then use this stuff. It's called plastic gauge. Cleveite makes it, and basically you tighten it down in there, sitting across the journal, and then it'll give you a reading of your clearance. And mine was right at about 0.0015, which is really good for an LS. So this thing's good to go. I need to go back and torque it now that I've figured out that all the clearances are good. So crank is in the block, and as you can see, it spins super easy and nicely by hand. No metal on metal. So this is pretty killer. It's coming together. It's pretty pristine. So I gapped all my piston rings tonight and got them installed on the pistons so that those are ready to go in. They're all labeled. I wrote everything down. I know that all the gaps are good. Used my feeler gauges and had to file some of the rings. So I made this little jig. So this is a Dremel cutoff wheel with the little cable running down to the Dremel plugged in. And I just laid my piston rings here on this piece of wood and filed the rings right there rather than having to do it by hand. Worked really, really well. Highly recommend that if you don't have one of the fancy piston ring filing tools. So this is good to go. I am probably gonna go get my connecting rod bearings, even though it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and start assembling the short block. I'll get the short block all together. Maybe if I'm feeling froggy, I'll even get the heads on it. I don't know, we'll see. There is lots of work left to be done and not a whole lot of time, so I really need to get this motor in the truck with the transmission, figure out the clutch and my hydraulic throw-out bearing and all that stuff, just to make sure it's all gonna work so I have time to order new parts if I need any. But yeah, that's a little update on what's going on here. I'll probably just cut to a time lapse of assembling this engine next time you see it. So yeah, cut to a time lapse of me putting an engine together in a sleep-deprived state. It's always a good idea, but we're making it happen, and that's what counts. Now that we got the bottom end rotating assembly together, it's time to start on the top end. So I know the camshaft is technically part of the bottom end, but it controls the top end. So we're using our Brian Tooley Racing Stage 3 truck cam that was in the first motor that went in the El Camino. That motor lost oil pressure, but the camshaft is totally fine. So we're gonna reuse it in this motor. We're using a Cloys timing gear and timing chain with ARP hardware. Putting it all together with Maxima assembly lube and using a Trick Flow specialty timing chain damper that bolts to these 3 bolts and puts a damper right here. When you upgrade your camshaft, having a damper to deal with that timing chain flex is always a good idea, so it's not just flopping around in there. So we'll be doing that and then putting a Melling high volume oil pump on it. That way, you know, we won't have any low pressure problems in the future. So I'm gonna start slapping this together, and here's a little tip for you guys. If you don't have a tool to be able to slide the cam in, a water pump bolt fits perfectly into this thing, and it gives you a little extra leverage when you're sliding that thing in on the bearing. So there we go. We're gonna get that slid into place and finish putting this motor together, slap the heads on, put the lifters in, all that good stuff. So here we go. You always want to put assembly lube on any engine components as you're putting them together, because you definitely don't want any of this stuff going in dry. That would not be ideal whatsoever. So put a little assembly lube on there before you slide it in, and then she'll be good to go. So you just slide the cam in nice and gentle. Try not to hit your cam bearings. And the further you get in there, the harder it is to avoid messing up your cam bearings. But you do your best, and should just go in with no real problems. And there's the 3rd main bearing. All right, we're almost there. There we go. Camshaft installed. So now that the camshaft is in there, we can put our cam retaining plate on, slide our Trick Flow specialty damper bracket in, and put our oil pump on before putting the front timing cover on, and it'll be good to go. It's another night here at the shop. Moby supervising as always. We're working on buttoning up the Interstate LS. We've got the oil pan on. I have the rear cover with a rear main seal in it. Yeah, the front cover with a new seal on it too. The windage tray, oil pump, oil pickup tube, all that is finalized, so this is not gonna have to come back off. And now that we've got all that done, I was able to slap my clutch on the back of the engine. And basically what we're using to make this work is a stock clutch off of like a 6-liter truck. This is an old school small block Chevy pressure plate and clutch, which apparently they still bolt up. Pretty interesting. So we're using that with an LS2 throwout bearing in there instead of the one that goes deeper in the crank. It's kind of further out and works pretty good. So we've been taking a measurement from the back of the bell housing to the clutch fingers. Then you take that measurement and you subtract it by the distance from where the bell housing actually mates the transmission to the front of your throwout bearing, because we're doing a Howell Racing hydraulic throwout bearing conversion. So we're switching from our mechanical clutch linkage to a hydraulic linkage because we really didn't have room for the Z-bar. So got those measurements. I have this thing shimmed accordingly. Ours required 3 shims. And now we can bolt these things together once I go back and torque all these bolts and flip it over, hook up the transmission, slide it into the truck, and call it good. Right?
Yep.
Had to do some math.
That algebra is coming in handy.
Yeah.
X equals all that he said.
Yeah, X equals Y plus Z negative EMC squared.
Do your algebra, children.
Yeah. Which gives us a clearance of roughly, I don't remember, 80 thousandths.
80, yes.
So it's a little over what they say. They say to set it up at 60 thousandths. But as your clutch wears, those clutch fingers actually come further out towards the throwout bearing. So if you give yourself a tiny bit of extra room, you won't ever have to pull it out and take shims out. And that's not a fun job. So, making it happen. So we've got the DEI floor and tunnel shield here on the center. We still need to do our seam tape to clean it all up, but he's gonna wrap up the interior work. We still have to do some insulation here on the tunnel, and yeah, then we'll be sliding the engine in.
You know how those shows always have deadlines, like you got to meet the schedule? Yeah, we're doing that too, only we really do. I think sometimes they make it up, we're not making it up.
No, we're just procrastinators, so we wait till the last minute to get everything done, because if it weren't for the last minute, nothing would ever get done. It's one of my favorite statements. And I'm one of those people, I kind of need a deadline, so in 6 days, I'm calling it. This is gonna run and drive.
It's going to caffeine and octane on Sunday morning.
Whether the brake lights and tail lights and turn signals and all that work, that's a whole nother question, but it will run and drive. And you can use hand signals like stop, go, left, right, all the stuff that people don't know anymore, so they'll definitely still rear end you. Luckily, the rear bumper's pretty tough, so.
I guess you're legally protected, right?
I think so. And this is still registered, so we're totally fine. This truck has insurance and registration on it.
Yes, it does.
Well, about a month ago, it was running. So anyway, I'm gonna get this engine buttoned up. I'm probably gonna slide it into the truck without putting the cylinder heads on it, just so we have a little extra room to work. And then I'll put them on when it's in the truck. So yeah, making it happen. One little thing at a time. Alrighty, it's another day here in the shop. We've got the engine and transmission bolted together here, hanging from the engine hoist. We've got Holley's clamshell mounts with their polyurethane inserts in. The Holley swap pan is on the bottom of the motor. And we're pretty much staged and ready to use these Hooker Blackheart mounts to mount this thing into this truck for the final time. So I don't have the cylinder heads on yet because it's kind of hard to get to everything in here once the cylinder heads are tucked here against the firewall. So I'm leaving them off. I'm gonna finish building it in the actual truck. It'll work just fine. So I'm not worried about that. We have our SM465 all cleaned up, attached to our bell housing. Our Howell Racing hydraulic throwout bearing is in there, working really good. So once we get it in there, we can hook it up to the Willwood clutch pedal and make sure it all functions. But I'm gonna get this slid into the truck, and then all that's left to do is everything else. And just like that, the engine is in the truck. Everything is lining up beautifully. I will say, I have to use some spacers with these engine mounts because these are intended for a C10. And believe it or not, even though the internet will not tell you, the C20 frame is slightly different. This is shorter than a C10 by about 3/4 of an inch. So I got a couple 3/4 inch spacers underneath the top of those brackets. Everything's lined up beautifully, and now it's time to assemble the top end of the engine. So I went ahead and cleaned everything up. I put my knock sensors in. I'm ready to slide these Johnson lifters that I got. I have these short travel Johnson lifters going in this thing. I've had them in an oil bath for a couple days to let the air get out of them. So I'm gonna pull these out of the oil bath and slide them into the motor. And then it's time to put the heads on. So I'm reusing the old 862s that used to be on the LM7 that was in that car. And a little trick for you, if you want to guarantee your head gasket seal, this is just a stock style Fel-Pro gasket. I sprayed it with this Loctite copper gasket adhesive. So it's like a thin copper layer, and that's gonna guarantee these heads seal. So I'm gonna work on getting the cylinder heads on there and making this happen. So cut to another time lapse. Well, it's always something. You guys probably can't see me very well because it started hailing and lightning and thunder and the power went out. So kind of hard to get any work done when the power is out. Luckily, we pulled all the cars in before that happened, so they're not out in the hail and the rain. As you can see, it's pretty much pitch black here in the back of the shop. My dad's working via cell phone light over here on the press, putting together a U-joint on our new drive shaft. So yeah, looks like it's going together good.
Oh yeah.
So working by cell phone light. A little better than candle light, but still not quite as good as having the shop lights actually on.
It's kind of depressing.
Depressing?
Yeah.
You're an idiot. But yeah, that's what's going on. So I guess I'll get back to filming when the lights turn back on because you guys really can't see much.
It's like Blair Witch Project going on.
You might notice the lights are back on, and that's not because the power has been restored. That's because I hooked up the generator. Just found out from Georgia Power that it was gonna be tomorrow morning when the lights come back on. So I'm gonna finish wrapping up a few more things on this engine, as well as installing the rear portion of the drive shaft. And then, yeah, I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go. There's a lot of steps left, but I want to make some progress tonight. So I'm going to figure out where I stand, what I need to do, and where to go from here.
Don't forget to check us out for daily content on Instagram at Jacob Ross Davis and the shop page at Sally Speed Shop. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you like, what you didn't like, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.